The sun stood straight up and mean. Heat wobbled over the flats until the scrub and stone looked like they were breathing. Jonah Hale walked the dry bed of the San Pedro boots, leaving shallow prints in powder dust. His shirt stuck to his back. His left shoulder bled through old cloth, the stain dried to a stiff, rusted flour. He had stopped counting hours. The air tasted like a hot skillet. When he licked his lips, he tasted salt and iron. The silver star on his vest flashed once with a tired shine, then dulled again a coin that had paid for too much. He told himself the same thing every few steps. Keep moving. The arroyo turned, and heat made a marbled shimmer where the wash widened. A hummingbird hung in that rippling light, a speck that glittered green over a saguaro bloom. Jonah blinked, and it was gone. The bloom was still there, pale as cream, the buzz only in his ears. Ellie Marsh's voice rose up from a place he kept shut. "You came back for me." He saw her hands knotted in rope, the wagon jolting gunfire behind them, the red scarf of a rider snapping in the wind. He shut the door on it. "Keep moving." His knees loosened without his consent. The sand came up slow, then fast. When he rolled onto his back, the sky burned white. He raised a hand out of habit, as if he could shade the sun. A shape cut across his eyes, hard edges black against the glare. A woman knelt her shadow, a small relief. Long black hair braided with beads and feathers. Dark eyes that slid over him without hurry. She tugged a stopper with her teeth and tipped a water skin. A single drop wet his lip cool as new snow, then another. "Slow," she said. He tried to lift his head and drink like a man drinks at the end of a shift. The water hit his tongue and his throat grabbed like a fist. He gagged and coughed, his whole body trying to climb out of itself. The woman drew the skin back just out of reach. He looked at her. She waited. He nodded. She fed him in sips, a quiet rhythm. Pine resin rode the water, the kind of taste that sticks to memory. When he could form a word, he used it. "Thanks." She glanced at the torn fabric and the seep of blood. "Can you stand?" "Think so." She hooked his good arm over her shoulder and rose with him. She was slighter than he expected and stronger than he deserved. They moved along the wash under a sky that trembled. The smell of dust and hot creosote followed them. Jonah counted steps the way a drowning man counts breaths. They reached a fold in the hills where boulders shouldered together. She slid between two slabs and into a narrow throat of rock that opened into a shallow cave. Shade fell over him like a blanket. He could breathe again. The cave held smells that did not belong to the open day. Smoke and stone, sage, damp clay. Bundles of plants hung from pegs. A bedroll sat tight in one corner. The hearth was a ring of stones black as pitch. She eased him down onto a flat rock beside it, then put the water skin in his hand. "Small drinks, then you sleep." Jonah took 3 careful as orders and set the skin down. "Name's Jonah Hale." He tapped the dull star on his vest without thinking. Redwater. Her gaze flicked at the badge and away. "Tala," she said. "Tala," he repeated. His mouth worked around the word dry as it was. She cut his shirt free from the wound with a short knife and did not waste any sympathy. The cloth came away with a wet suck and a bright pain that jumped up his neck. He kept his eyes on her hands. She ground bark and leaves in a small bowl and mixed the paste with water until it went dark. She warned him with her eyes. Then she pressed it in. Fire ran from his shoulder to his teeth. He breathed through it and gripped the stone with his good hand. He watched a silver bracelet at her wrist catch light blue flecks of turquoise set in hammered metal. The color cooled the room, if only in his head. "The bullet went through," she said. "No need to dig." "Good," he said through his teeth. She wrapped him in clean strips that smelled like smoke and rosemary. The world steadied. He could feel each beat of his heart in the wound, a small hammer striking cloth. "Eat later," she said. "Sleep now." Jonah blinked, and the day was thinner. The cave mouth held a slice of late light. He slept like a man falling, and then like a man held. When he woke, night had set soft and blue at the edges. The fire was a low red circle. Tala sat cross-legged near it, a line of leather in her hands and a bone needle flashing. The sound of her work was almost a metronome. Outside, something cried far off, then quieted. "Water," she said, nodding toward a clay cup. He drank. Cool slid down into him and exploded into small reliefs everywhere at once. He swallowed air and set the cup aside. "How long?" "Half a day, sundown now." His shoulder throbbed in a dull way that felt kinder. The paste stung, but under it was a cool certainty. He breathed through it and listened. "You live alone out here," he said. She did not look up from the needle. "Yes." "You saw me from up high." "From the ridge." She nodded toward the cave mouth. "You walk like a man with sand in his blood." He almost smiled. "Fair." He noticed a column of smoke to the south, a thin, gray drawing laid over the stars. It rose from behind a low ridge straight until the wind leaned it. "You see that?" he said. "Yes." "Trouble. Not for this hour." She set the leather aside and stood. She took a bundle down and fed the fire with fingers that knew the way. The smoke that rose was sweet pine and something bitter. She closed her eyes and spoke in words he did not know a sound more breath than speech. He heard one name twice in it. Koa, he did not ask who. When she opened her eyes, the fire crawled lower. He watched the light run over the bracelet again. He watched the beads in her hair catch sparks as if they held their own. "You saved Ellie Marsh," she said, as if the thought had reached her. Jonah blinked once. "She is home." The answer was small and exact. He felt what it cost to say less. Tala nodded as if that was all the story needed. "Sleep again," she said. "Your body will do what medicine cannot." He eased himself down onto the bedroll she had not used. The fabric held a clean scent of sage and something floral. He lay on his right side and adjusted until the ache settled into a place he could name. The cave hummed with small sounds. Wind in the throat of rock, the fire whispering. Tala breathed with patience, a steady measure. A moth came in from the dark and orbited the coals. It moved in a figure 8, tracing its own law. The moth's wings flickered silver when it crossed the glow. Jonah's eyes followed it until the world softened. Sleep reached for him. Stone scraped outside. A weight slid against the rock at the entrance. Tala was on her feet in an instant, the knife in her hand a black tooth. Jonah's hand went to his holster. His fingers found the grip and closed. Another scrape. Then a body fell forward into the mouth of the cave and lay there in a ragged shape that shivered once and went still. Tala and Jonah held their breath in the same second. The fire cracked. The figure groaned. Tala moved first knife low and ready. Jonah levered himself up the pane, bright again, the air sharp with smoke and dust and the iron stink of new blood. They reached the threshold together. The man on the stone floor looked up with eyes that did not yet know where they were. His shirt was torn and dark at the side. He tried to speak and swallowed his own breath. "Don't shoot," he whispered. The knife did not lower, neither did the gun. The cave held the word and then let it go. They turned the man onto his back. The wound was high along his ribs where the shirt had gone black and stiff. He had a day's beard and a face that would have been pleasant if it were not gray at the edges. He blinked at their hands and tried to focus. "Name," Jonah said. The man wet his lips and failed. Tala set the cup to his mouth and tipped only a thin curve of water. He swallowed in small hurt swallows, then breathed out as if the cup had given him a life. "Wyatt," he said. "Wyatt Doss." "Who shot you, Wyatt Doss?" "Pike's boys," he said. His eyes found Jonah's badge as if it made its own light. "You fit the star they talked about." Tala looked at the dark stain. She pressed her palm above it. "Bullet is still inside. You bleed more if you talk." Wyatt gave a short laugh and then winced. Not big on talking anyway. "Hold him," Tala said. She cut free the rest of the shirt and cleaned the skin with water and an herb that smelled like mint and bitter bark. Jonah braced Wyatt's shoulder and felt heat through skin and cloth. Tala glanced once at Jonah, then at the knife, and then at a tool with a bent tip from her pouch. The room leaned toward the work. Wyatt bit down on a strip of leather. Tala worked in with careful pressure. The sound was soft at first, then a wet click as metal touched metal. Wyatt's fingers beat a stutter on the stone as the tool worried the edge of the slug. Sweat ran into his hair and across the dirt at his temple. The strip of leather groaned in his teeth. "Hold," Tala said again, calm as a metronome. The tool came free with the bullet pinched in its jaws. The drop of blood that followed was the color of old cherries. Wyatt exhaled through his nose and let the leather fall. He blinked at the small gray thing in Tala's hand, as if it had been a lie and was now a fact. She pressed the paste and bound him with steady cloth. She spoke in her own language again for a breath, and the sounds went into the stone and stayed there. Wyatt looked from one to the other. "I am obliged," he said, voice thin. "You got away with pain." He slid his eyes toward Jonah. "Pike is close. He has 6 in the saddle, maybe 7. He thinks I was tracking him." "Were you?" Jonah said. Wyatt swallowed. "I was tracking a buck. That is what I told myself. Pike does not like shadows. He turned me into one." "Sleep," Tala said. "Talk later." She put one hand against his chest and the other over the bandage. Wyatt's breath slowed. His eyes found the fire and stayed there until the lid sank. Jonah eased back to the rock. The smell of iron and sage braided in the warm dark. The fire fell to a low bed. The column of smoke on the far ridge thinned and went. The night went quiet again except for one owl and the scrape of some small life in the scrim of brush. Tala cleaned the tool and placed the bullet in a dish. The gray bead sat there and looked like a seed that would never grow. "You knew where to find the metal," Jonah said. She nodded. I have seen it before. He let that sit. After a while, she took a flat mirror from a pouch and held it to the low glow, testing how the surface took light. She set it back without comment. He watched her face for a place where a question would not be rude. He did not find it. Rest, she said. We move with the first cool. Jonah slept in fits. Each time he woke, the cave was the same and not the same. Tala's silhouette by the fire, Wyatt's breath thin but present. The moth had burned its pattern into the dark and gone somewhere no one could follow. At a wash of gray light, Tala touched Jonah's boot with 2 fingers. Come. He stood careful of the shoulder. They stepped into a morning that felt made new. The air was cool in the throat, and the light had not yet grown teeth. The rocks held the night's cold like a secret. Far out, a line of coyotes spoke to one another and let the talk fade. Tala moved along the base of the rocks with a snare line coiled in her hand. She stopped near a set of prints so light Jonah would have missed them if she had not set her fingers around them. 2 toes splayed in 2 out a faint drag where the heel skipped. Rabbit, she said, hungry. They set 3 loops under the crown of a creosote where the trail slid under. Tala showed him the knot with slow patience. He thought of tying off a rope in a storm and how better knots stay quiet in your hand. The loop lay in sand like a letter written for someone else. They moved to a shallow run where water had once been, the clay cracked into plates. Tala cut a paddle of prickly pear and laid it on a rock. She knocked the spines out with a stick, then sliced the flesh and handed him a slab. It was cool and slick and tasted like green air and faint dust. It eased his mouth in a way water had not. You carry too much heat, she said. This helps. He nodded with his mouth full and felt his face get stupid with gratitude. They went on collecting cholla buds with a forked stick, avoiding the nettled halos as if they had will of their own. Jonah reached for one without watching, and the spine slid under his skin. It burned like a small lesson. He used the point of his knife to pry it out and sucked the sting. Back at the cave, Wyatt had rolled to one side. He was pale under the stubble, and his eyes were open, not seeing. The fever was not high, but it had the look of a thing that could climb. Tala set a pot over the coals and added strips of dried meat with herbs that made the air smell like a kitchen and a church. Jonah went through Wyatt's pack. He found cartridges wrapped in cloth and a small book with pages full of numbers and little arrows. There were 2 rolled sheets that were not quite maps and not quite nothing. One had a line of blue ink that followed bends in a valley. The other had marks where stake holes would go. On one corner, someone had written Reliance in a careful hand with a small star next to it. Jonah put the papers back where he found them. Wyatt watched him from the bedroll. Not much in there to steal, he said. I am not a thief, Jonah said. Good, Wyatt said. You do not look like one. You look like the man who shot 2 of Pike's riders and cut a girl loose from a wagon in the same minute. Jonah kept his face plain. Eat. Tala handed Wyatt a bowl. He took slow sips until the sweat cooled on his nose. His eyes cleared and then shuddered, cleared, and shuddered again. They talk about Apache gold, he said as if to the bowl. They say the fort sits on it. They say there is a map that shows where to dig. Tala's spoon stopped. She did not look up. There is no gold. Pike believes in it, Wyatt said. Belief is almost the same thing in men like him. You sleep now, Tala said. Wyatt closed his eyes. He mumbled to the fever. Jonah leaned close to hear. The words came broken and clear. Map, Reliance, Hummingbird. He said the last as if it were someone's name. Jonah let the sound settle. He lay back on the smooth rock and looked at the mouth of the cave. A stripe of day cut across the ground like a blade. The smell of pinon smoke and mint kept the rest of the world at arm's length. He drifted for a time under the steady small noise of Tala's work. By late morning the sun took the cool away. Tala stepped out to the ridge with the mirror. She knelt in a shallow notch and sent a sharp pulse across to Bitterroot Bluff. Light touched and left, touched and left. It felt like sending a thought you wanted back. Jonah watched her face. There was no hope in it and no despair. There was only work. She pocketed the mirror and stood. Someone will see, she said. Or no one will. We still move. Move where? Fort Reliance, she said, and then she paused as if the name had done something to the air, built on wrong ground. Jonah thought of the map corner and the small star. He watched Wyatt where he slept. Stone walls are better than this if those men come. Stone walls do not save a man who brings the wrong thing inside, Tala said. He nodded. I'm not arguing with that. They packed what could be carried. Tala took the heavy part without making a scene of it. Jonah doubled the strap of Wyatt's pack and slung it. Wyatt stood with help, and the lines around his mouth deepened. Tala gave him a tea that tasted like metal in winter. He swallowed it like a penance. They left the cave behind them in a room that looked the same and was not. Tala brushed out tracks with a branch. The wash ran white under the noon. Heat rose off stone. They moved on the edges of shade from rock to rock, a kind of animal logic that saved skin and water. The hum of insects made a net over the sound of their own steps. They stepped through a forest of ocotillo that spread like fingers. Red tips burned against the sky. Jonah's hat caught a thorn and he pulled it free with a soft curse. Tala smiled without teeth and without cruelty. Wyatt fell behind and then caught up on a breath that wanted to be a cough. They crossed a slice of open where the ground went to salt dust. A line of old stakes traced a dead straight cut toward nothing. Rust stained the wood like weathered blood. Jonah stopped and touched one and felt the give of rot. "You know what that is," Wyatt said from behind him. "Looks like rails were meant to come through." "Meant to," Wyatt said. He did not say more. He did not need to. They dropped into a narrow arroyo where the walls went yellow and touched overhead. Tala pressed her palm to the stone and felt along a seam. She stopped at a trickle that darkened the rock and pooled in a thumbprint at the base. "Drink," she said, slow. The water tasted like copper and cold clay. It did more good than it had any right to. They rested under an overhang where shade stacked. Wyatt slept with his mouth open. Tala checked Jonah's bandage and made a new paste. The sting was brief and honest. She tied the last knot and looked at him. "You carry ghosts," she said, quiet and factual. "So do you," he said. She nodded and handed him a slice of dried meat. They ate in the kind of silence that feeds more than it takes. They set out again when the light went softer. The land began to grow its own bones under their feet. Ridges lifted and fell. The wind carried a new smell of ash from somewhere beyond sight. Jonah kept scanning the margins out of habit. Tala watched their back trail with eyes that missed nothing. Wyatt kept to the middle, his head down, his eyes busy in a way that told Jonah he still counted things by habit. Near the crest of a low hill, Tala slowed and lifted her hand. On a flat face of rock, a shallow figure had been cut so long ago the edges had worn to the color of the stone. A bird floated there, long bill wings cupped in a pause that never finished. A hummingbird caught in stillness that was not still. "Yours," Jonah said. He did not mean Tala, he meant her people. Tala touched the carved line with 2 fingers and did not look at him. The air moved, and then it did not. She let her hand fall. They climbed the last stretch while the sun set to one side. On the far slope, the ground fell away into a broad basin. Stone walls stood there, 4 low sides, a shape older than its years because the desert makes everything older. Fort Reliance lay within the old command building, dark under a roof that still held. The main gate was a black rectangle where timber had given up long ago. Far to the south, a thin column of dust rose and kept rising. It drew a diagonal between sky and ground, pale against the fading blue. Tala and Jonah stood with the hill's wind in their faces. Wyatt set his hand on his bandage as if to steady it. No one spoke. The basin took the sound of their breath and held it like a bowl. The walls below waited in their own quiet. The dust line in the south kept its steady climb. They dropped off the ridge and crossed the basin in a slow diagonal, keeping to the shadows of low rock and scrub. The fort grew as the ground fell, stone walls lifting out of the pale like a ship that had run aground and stayed. The main gate was only a gap, timbers long gone. Inside, a courtyard spread with patches of prickly weeds and wind-blown trash. Buildings shouldered the walls, roofs mostly intact, windows narrow as slits. Tala led them to the well at the center. The rope and bucket had rotted to a smear, but when Jonah leaned over, cool, rose from below like breath. He lowered a canteen with Wyatt's line and brought it up half full. The water smelled of clay and coin. They boiled it in Tala's pot and drank in turns. It went down rough and right. Wyatt sagged against a wall, eyes bright with fever and stubbornness. Jonah left him a tin cup and walked the inside perimeter. Footprints, old and newer, crossed the dust. A jackrabbit sprang from a pile of boards and took the length of the yard in 3 impossible bounds. In the officers' quarters, the air sat cool, a fine grit of dust on the floor. A cracked mirror on the wall threw back Jonah's face and badge in a shade that did not feel like him. On the far corner stood a small stone house set a little apart. Its doorway wore carvings that time had not erased. Lines and circles, a bird that was all curve and point. The hummingbird again caught between beats. Tala ran her hands over the lintel, then pressed her palm to a spot in the floor, beside a waist-high altar. She shifted the pressure in a pattern that looked like prayer and work at once. Stone answered stone in a low grind. A square of floor slid enough to show a dark throat descending. "Bring the lamp," she said. The air changed as soon as they took the first steps, a dry cool that tasted clean and old. The stair opened into a round chamber cut smooth. Paintings circled the walls, reds and blacks and ochres that made hunters and storms, and a line of small birds. Niches held bones wrapped in faded cloth. Silver cuffs and beads carved masks with eyes that watched without judgment. The light from Tala's lamp found turquoise and made it sea-bright for a blink. Jonah kept his hands at his sides. His breath made a small sound in there, the kind you hear when everything else has finished speaking. Tala moved like someone who knows which stones are names. "This is what they call gold," she said, "what cannot be sold." He looked at the things and felt his badge go heavy. He thought of men with shovels and stories. He thought of the word reliance written in a hand that did not belong here. "How many chambers?" he asked. "Many," she said. "This is the skin, not the body." She held the lamp close to the floor on the far side of the room and showed him a low door that was no door until you knew where to look. "There is a way to seal from below. Few know the pattern." "Show me," he said. She did her fingers patient and precise. He repeated the press in silence until the stone gave the soft answer it had given her. The sound was small and full of gravity. Footsteps sounded faint on the stair. Wyatt stood in the entry, pale, a hand on the jamb. He did not come down. His eyes took in the circle and then fixed on the altar the way a man fixes on a horizon he is trying to reach. "Should not be here," Tala said. "I know," Wyatt said. "I am not here." He forced a dry smile and turned away. When they climbed back into daylight, the sun had slid toward the rim. Shadows stretched across the yard and made long bars. Jonah set Tala on the northwest watchpoint and took the southeast tower. Wyatt went to the gate with the Springfield and Jonah's spare revolver. Ammunition was counted and counted again. Jonah blocked the lower doors with old tables and boards pulled from the barracks wood that had waited a long time for purpose. From the tower, the land to the south lay in one sweep. The dust column had grown and resolved into riders. 6 for certain, maybe a 7th weaving the line. They slowed as the walls rose full in their sight, then fanned and halted at 100 yards. The lead man wore a red strip of cloth at his throat, the color loud even at this distance. He raised a white rag on the barrel of his rifle and rode forward 10 slow paces. "Parley," Jonah called, voice flat and carrying. The lead rider gave him a size-up smile. "Sheriff Hale of Redwater," he said. "That makes me a lucky man." "Name," Jonah said. "Morgan Pike," the man said. "We have friends in common." Wyatt's jaw tightened where he stood by the gate. Jonah did not look his way. "You are a long way from town," Pike, Jonah said. "Chasing a story," Pike answered. "A small bird with a long bill that leads a man to silver and sleep." His eyes went to the little house at the corner and back again. "Send Doss out with the map, and you and the lady can walk away. No harm, no hard feelings." "You do not have a reputation for keeping feelings," Jonah said. Pike's smile widened and died. "Be wise." Wyatt stepped out at the gap. He spoke without raising the rifle. "You left me in the street at Silver Creek bleeding like a cut pig while you took the money and the maps, so I am done carrying your luck." Pike rolled the horse's bit and looked as if something had gone sour behind his teeth. "You will tell stories, Wyatt. You were paid to find a door. You forgot who feeds you." "Doors closed," Wyatt said. Pike's eyes slid to Jonah again, then to Tala on the far tower. He let the white rag droop and then lowered it all the way. So much for talk. The first shot came from one of the men on the left. It hit stone below Jonah's boot and blew dust up into his eyes. Jonah had the answer in his hands before the grit settled. He put a round on the lip of the rock that protected the shooter. The man ducked out of sight. From the right, another rifle lit and spat. Tala's rifle cracked once, and someone swore behind the cover they had chosen. Pike pulled back to the line and set his men where the low ground favored them. Their fire settled into a rhythm that felt like a song that had not yet learned melody. Jonah picked shots that were for pushing, not killing, conserving what they had. Wyatt at the gate worked with care, every movement measured. His face was washed clean of any expression Jonah could read. There was a pause long enough to hear the wind drag over the plain. A hawk drew a crescent in the sky and slid away. Pike stood in his stirrups and shouted. His men shifted, and then rushed in 2 short bursts, one toward the gate and the other toward Tala's wall. They kept low and used the scraps of ground. Tala laid a shot across the front runner's shoulder and turned him into dirt. Jonah rang a bullet off a rock by the second and sent him scrambling back. The gate crew reached 30 yards and stalled in a hail of splinters from Wyatt's careful work. Then they tumbled into the shallow wash and disappeared. Silence again, thicker now, as if both sides had taken stock of the same truth. Jonah swung his glass to Bitterroot Bluff. At first he took it for a trick of angle, then the ridge lifted small stars of fire one by one. Torches lined the high ground in a watchful curve. Figures stood behind them, hard to number, easy to feel. The wind brought a faint thread of bone whistle and drum, the sound separate from war and completely related to it. Tala saw them too. He felt the shift in her stillness from across the yard. Her hand went to the bracelet, not to count, only to know where it was. Jonah touched the badge through his shirt and did not feel comfort. Down in the dust, Pike turned in his saddle and took in the ridge. He raised his hand to shade his eyes, then lowered it slow. He spat and said one clear word that carried to the wall without help of echo. Hell. Pike gave the signal with a lift of his hand. 2 riders broke from the line and came low, each with a glass bottle tucked in at the saddle. Jonah saw the dark slosh inside and the rag wicks that dangled. Fire, not talk. He sighted on the nearer rider and put a round into the dirt in front of the horse. The animal checked, skittered, and the bottle flew wide and burst against the wall in a cough of flame that licked and failed. The second rider made the throw clean. The bottle shattered near the gateposts and flamed yellow along dry wood scraps. Tala's rifle cracked from the northwest wall. The man who had thrown folded at the waist and disappeared behind a tumble of stone. The smell of kerosene took the air on that side and rode the wind. Jonah shifted angle and scanned for the red scarf. Pike sat his horse without hurry, eyes full of calculation, as if all of this were only account work. A shot from the far wash sent a thin chip from the tower edge near Jonah's boot. He dropped back, breathed once, and returned 2 measured shots to keep the line honest. The cylinder turned under his thumb and felt light. Ammunition had a way of making its own math in a man's head. A hot sting lit along Jonah's forearm. He looked down and saw a thin line of blood where a grazing bullet had skated. It burned worse than it had right to. He let the pain pass, then used it to focus. He set a 3rd shot off the rock where a muzzle flash had bloomed. The shooting from that position stopped. Wyatt held steady at the gate gap with the Springfield braced on a crate. He fired, worked the bolt, fired again, no waste, no show. Sweat stood like dew at his hairline. When a lull came, he lifted his head and shouted so Pike could hear. "You want a door, Morgan, it is not yours." Pike lifted his chin as if the words had drifted up from the ground. He did not answer. He palmed his hat brim, then waved 2 men forward with the easy command of one who never doubted. The attackers shifted tactics. 4 men cut a dead mesquite and dragged the trunk between them toward the gate, using a shallow swale for cover. 2 others laid down a steady scatter of fire to pin the walls. Tala risked a quick sight and put a round into the bark, shaving rough chips. The men kept coming and began to swing the trunk so its blunt end faced the gap. "Ram," Jonah said into the courtyard as he came down off the tower. "Fall to the inside line." Wyatt heard and nodded. He took 1 more shot to push the closest rifleman back into his hole and then moved. Jonah and Tala pulled into the shell of the command building, the room where the air still held a hint of old ink and leather. They had already stacked tables and benches to make a low wall. Jonah shoved a chest into place and felt the scrape of wood through his shoulder. The first hit landed against the gate with a dull thud that traveled the stone. The second hit split something dry and old, and dust fell in a fine sheet from the lintel. Splinters tinked across the yard. Jonah gave the entrance a final look, and then hit the floor behind their makeshift cover. Tala slid beside him and checked her rifle with hands that did not tremble. "How many?" Jonah said. She lifted the pouch and looked once. 4 rounds. Wyatt checked the Springfield and the revolver Jonah had given him. 6 in the rifle, 2 in the hand. Jonah thumbed his cylinder. 3 counted and 1 questionable. He had loose rounds in his pocket, but not many. The room closed around that fact without panic. Outside, the battering ram came in again. The old gate gave with a sound like a dead tree. Pike called from the yard, voice clear and even. "You are down to noise and furniture, Sheriff. Send me the map and we all ride away breathing." "There's no map," Jonah called back, "and if there was, it would not belong to you." Pike made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had any humor left in it. Then the ram hit again. The gate broke. Men poured through in a loose knot, yelling to make themselves brave. Wyatt's rifle answered twice. 2 figures went down in a twist of legs and dust. Tala's shot shaved a 3rd man's hat and kept him low. Jonah waited for the first shadow to cross the doorway and then fired into the floor by the threshold to turn speed into caution. The attackers answered with a ragged volley. Glass exploded in the window frame above Jonah's head. Wood kicked splinters and the air filled with the chalk taste of dust and the bite of smoke. Someone outside threw a bottle and it flared at the corner, hungry heat moving along the rotten lintel and into a curtain that had survived longer than sense. Flame took it in a blink. The fire, Tala said. Forget it, Jonah said. Hold the door. They worked in a small rhythm, each motion clean, no waste. Wyatt fired until the Springfield clicked on empty, then drew the revolver and held the gap. Jonah took careful shots meant to keep heads down, the kind that used powder but bought seconds. Tala placed one round at a time with a hunter's patience. A body thumped the doorframe and slid out of view. Another voice swore, and the swearing ended in a cough. Smoke began to scratch the inside of Jonah's throat. He coughed once and caught it, then coughed again and could not catch it. Heat came along the ceiling in an orange wave. The room turned into a bellows. The floor under his knee grew warm. Tala crawled to the back wall and counted the boards like a woman counting prayer beads. She stood and took 3 steps from the corner, then knelt and laid her palms flat to the gritty floor. She pressed and released, pressed and held. Nothing happened. She shifted her weight before the last press, as if her body remembered an old dance. Stone spoke under her hands in a low grind. Here, she said. The square lifted half an inch on a hidden axis. Cool air rose from the gap and cut the smoke with a knife edge. The opening was only shoulder wide and dropped into black. There is a shaft down to a lateral, Tala said. We use it or we burn. Wyatt looked from the door to the hole. His eyes went to Jonah. We do not have a minute. Go, Jonah said. Tala next. Wyatt slid his legs into the shaft and felt for holds. He found the first, then the next, and went down into the dark with a hiss of grit. Tala slung her pouch and looked at Jonah, once a measure of a look that held no drama. She lowered herself, toes searching, then vanished to the chest and the shoulders and then the crown of her braids. She was gone. Jonah put 2 fast shots out the doorway to hold the men at the threshold and threw his last loose round into the cylinder with clumsy fingers. Someone outside hit the door with a shoulder and the tables jumped. He fired into the jamb where a hand had appeared, and the hand snatched back. He picked up the empty Springfield and jammed it sideways under the door latch as a wedge to buy a breath. The stock splintered and held. He turned to the opening and swung his legs in. The stone was cool and wet in the holds where fingers had worn them. He went down fast and careful until his boots found Tala's shoulder. She pressed his ankle to tell him where to put his weight, and he let go. He reached the floor of the lateral and crouched under a roof that pressed the top of his hat. The light from above was small and gray. He lifted the stone square the last inch, set it in place with both hands, and felt its seat. Shouts thudded above and turned to a muffled rumble. The heat lessened. The air in the tunnel was cold and smelled of dust that had waited centuries to be touched. Tala struck a spark to a wick, and the lamp flared. The small flame made a skin of gold on the rock and showed the world in a circle. Wyatt stood a few steps on one hand, braced against the wall, the other across his ribs. His face had gone the color of old paper. This way, Tala said. The tunnel took them with a slow grade and a long memory. Paintings rode the walls in places where smoke could not find them. Lines and shapes that made storms and animals and human figures in dances Jonah did not recognize. Hummingbirds appeared where the tunnel forked, carved shallow into the rock with wings that meant motion. Tala brushed a wing with her thumb and chose the branch that turned left. The floor had been worn by feet and by time. In some places the stone had been laid in squares, fitted tight as words in a good story. They passed a small chamber with a low altar and a bowl of stone that held a crust of old ash. Tala did not pause. Far behind and above a sound came like furniture dragged across stone. It faded to a hum, and then to nothing. Jonah felt the ache of thirst again. His canteen knocked his hip, and he realized it was light. He remembered the dropped water skin at the barricade, the way the fire had taken that corner, and drunk without thanks. The thought passed. The body kept going. The tunnel bent and narrowed and opened. The air on his face shifted and tasted faintly of juniper. A pale seam of daylight ran along the next turn. Tala lifted the lamp and then cupped it so the flame would not show. They moved by, feel the last 10 paces. They came out into a cleft between 2 big stones. Night lay on the hills like velvet and took their breath down. Below the fort was a box of shadow with small lights bouncing inside the yard. Figures moved and stopped and moved again. Pike's men were hunting like men who had lost the trail in their own camp. From the ridge, the line of torches still burned. The wind carried a dry thread of chant and a drum that set a second pulse in Jonah's chest. Wyatt put his back to the rock and let his weight down in a controlled slide. He held his side and breathed shallow. His eyes were on the yard. He will tear that place apart and find nothing, he said. Tala watched without expression. He looks for what is not his. The stone knows the difference. Jonah stood with his hands on the rock and felt the old cold ground against his palms. The silver star under his shirt touched skin. He reached in and took it out. It sat in his hand with the weight of a thing that had done its work and more. Moonlight slid across it and made it glow for a second like something alive. He closed his hand again and felt the edge bite. There was a small silence. The night made a space for it. Tala looked at him. Her voice came low and even no more pressure than the wind. When this ends, what are you without that badge? They moved along the slope while the fort's small lights shuffled below. The ridge torches burned like a second nearer sky. The air cooled and took smoke from their clothes. Tala led past a scatter of juniper and into a fold of ground that held night quieter than the rest. Rocks ringed a shallow bowl. A spring worked out of the seam and laid a thread of water across moss the color of new leaves. They stopped at the rim. Jonah felt the chill come up from the trickle and lift the heat off his skin. He knelt and cupped a palm. The water tasted like copper and stone and shade. It spread through him in slow circles. Figures rose from the dark around the spring. They had been there already woven into the place. A man stepped forward. Age had pared him down to the fine lines of bone and will. He wore one long feather and a robe the color of bark. When he spoke to Tala, his voice had the grain of old wood. They talked low and quick. Jonah heard Koa once and Reliance once and a word for door he did not know. The elder nodded to Jonah, not as a welcome and not as a dismissal, only as a mark that he had been measured and counted. Warriors took horses from the shadow and rode toward the basin without hurry. They moved like a thought the land was already having. Jonah watched them go until the night took their shapes. Wyatt sat with his back to a stone and closed his eyes. His breath came thin and even. He seemed smaller now that the running had stopped. After a time, he pulled a roll of paper from his pack and looked at it as if it belonged to someone else. He set it on a flat rock near the spring. His flint struck and the corner flared. The flame ate lines and numbers licked at a square stamped with R and let it curl to ash. "I am done selling bones," he said. The words were quieter than the fire. Jonah gave one short nod. Tala watched the paper turn black and did not speak. Dawn came in a slow opening pink in the east, then gold. The ridge torches dimmed and went out one by one. 2 riders returned as the light took the last of the stars. One carried a strip of red cloth, the same shade that had shone on a throat the night before. He set it on the rock beside the spring. Blood had darkened half of it to brown. No one touched it. The elder spoke again. Tala answered. He turned to Jonah and used the slow English he had. "Caves will move their mouth. Stones know how to hide when told the right words. She will help." Tala's gaze held Jonah's. There was pride there in work and a new weight. They ate what could be eaten. Tala brewed a drink that cleared the edge of the night off the eyes. The spring ran with its quiet purpose. A hummingbird came when the light warmed the air. It hung over the moss and then dropped needlebill, touching the water so quick the surface only thought about breaking. It hovered to Jonah's left, a small green coin spun in the sun. The bracelet on Tala's wrist answered with its own small light. Jonah reached into his shirt and took the badge out. It lay cold on his palm. He turned it once and saw himself in it as a blur. He set it on a flat stone at the water's bend. The current licked the air just above and did not quite touch the metal. He stood there long enough to feel the weight leave his pocket and find a new place in his chest. "I kept order," he said. "Some days I forgot why." Tala took the bracelet off and held it out. "A vow," she said, "not a badge." He looked at the silver and the blue set in it. The metal was cool when it met his skin. He felt the weight settle in a different way. He did not pretend it fit yet. He closed his hand and then opened it and wore it without ceremony. Men and women came to the spring through the morning. They spoke with Tala and the elder and marked paths on the ground with sticks and small stones. Jonah understood pieces and not the whole. He learned to stand where he was useful and quiet where he was not. Wyatt slept and woke and slept again. When he was awake, he cut his surveyor's book into thin strips and fed the fire one page at a time. He did not look up to see if anyone watched. Somewhere to the west, a hammer rang on wood. The sound came thin over the hills, a tap and a pause and a tap again. Jonah turned his head toward it and saw nothing new. Old stakes would have neighbors soon. Tala heard it too. She did not speak. The elder's eyes went to the same place and then back to the spring. Near midday, the riders who had gone to the basin returned without trophies and without stories. The elder greeted them and set them to work, lifting flat stones. Tala stood with them. She moved in a circle of tasks, and in each one she looked at home. Jonah carried and hauled where she pointed, and in the pauses he watched her lay pressed hands on rock and whisper. The stone listened. When the heat found its full shape, the work paused. The elder sat by the water. Jonah took the badge from the rock and placed it in the elder's hand. The old man studied it with his thumb as if it were a kind of leaf. He set it on the ground between them and put a round pebble beside it. The pebble caught light and gave it back in a way the badge could not. He slid the badge toward Jonah again. "You keep," he said, "not for wearing, for remembering." Jonah picked it up and tucked it into his coat pocket. It sat there with the weight of a thing that had changed names. Tala crouched at the water. She washed her hands, and the silver at Jonah's wrist caught the ripple. She looked up, and the smile was small and sure. "We can stay," Jonah said. He did not dress it as a question. "We can build," she said. The hummingbird came once more and traced a figure in the air that was not quite a circle and not quite a line. The spring kept talking to the stones. The wind shifted and brought a touch of mesquite smoke from far off, thin as a thread. Jonah breathed and let it pass through. He stood with Tala and watched the light make work of the day. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.